2023 is quite a big year, especially for Aquarius. For the last little while, it seems like Aquarius always gets the spotlight when it comes to significant paradigm-shifting astrological events. I'm sure you've heard about the so-called Age of Aquarius by now, and while that's a topic that stirs up a lot of controversy in the astrological community, regardless of whether we are in the thick of it or now, your sign is still running the show. And consequently, natives such as yourself are caught in the middle of this thick web of authority and responsibility. This year that might intensify even more. Still, before we get to what that can possibly mean, it's essential to take a look at how the year starts, so when the time comes for you to step up your game, you'll be fully prepared for what's to come. January is an important month for many reasons. Of course, it's the beginning of the year, and astrologically speaking, we place a lot of emphasis on origins. Yet, what really stands out about this particular inception is that we'll still be dealing with some challenging transits from the previous year. While those are relatively brief, they are by no means weak. January is the host of the tail end of the double retrograde of Mercury and Mars happening both in your 12th and 5th house. The topic of these houses couldn't be more different. The 5th house is the place of joy, fun and excitement, while the 12th is the place of sadness, seclusion and meditation. Having these two retrogrades happening simultaneously can merge these topics together, creating a great degree of cognitive dissonance. One way to interpret it is experiencing loss as a consequence of taking entertainment a bit too far. The 5th house is where we find our sexuality, so these two topics could be related. Conversely, the 5th house is also the place of children, so those who have children might experience fights and arguments with their offspring. As challenging as that might sound, once Mercury and Mars start moving forward again on the 18th of January, there will be a lot of space for improvement. Take this as an opportunity to learn from younger people, whether you have children or not. Don't be afraid of cranking up the humbleness a bit. Now, moving on to the more extensive topics of the year, being humble and responsible is definitely something you'll want to be doing. This is because Saturn, who's been transiting through your first house of self for the last 3 years, will finally move to your second house of finances. This transit starts on the 7th of March. Your 2nd and 5th are intrinsically related. Especially since in the world we live in, one can only really have fun with money. You'll want to remember the consequences you had to face in the early year moving forward. Saturn is the planet of boundaries and restrictions, and since it will be transiting through your finances and resources for the next 2.5 years, this will be a big push for you to learn how to budget and plan how to use your help with a long-term focus. Saturn detests instant gratification, and while this might look like there will be less money coming in at first glance, that's not necessarily the truth. This transit is here merely to show you the cost of your greater aspirations. Saturn tells you that if you want it bad enough, you're going to have to plan for it accordingly. On the other hand, if you are an Aquarius born during the night, you'll want to be a lot more conservative with financial matters. Especially if you're around 28 to 29 years old. Saturn tends to be more difficult for those born at night, so you'll want to take this a lot more seriously. Saturn is not the only big boy planet changing signs this year, though. Pluto, who's been in your 12th house for almost the last 20 years, is finally making its first steps toward your first house. Because Pluto moves very slowly, it will retrograde back into the 12th towards the year's half point. With that said, you'll be getting a preview of a much bigger transit from March 23rd to the 11th of June. Pluto making this shift is actually quite welcome. Like mentioned earlier, the 12th house is the home of many challenging topics. Sometimes it can trigger some mental health barriers, and having the planet of depth moving out of there can feel like a breath of fresh air. As it enters the first house, Pluto asks you to bring those lessons learned from those problematic places down to earth. It takes things like sorrow and anxiety out of the depths of your psyche and brings it to the surface. This is a great time to face the things that used to hinder you in a much more tangible way. While this might not necessarily be a change from hardship to ease, you can still think of it as fighting an invisible enemy versus one right in front of you. When you can see them, you can study their weak points and go for one final blow. Yet, we can't forget the retrograde, meaning that there's more to learn from having this enemy hide in the shadows. So stay attentive. The good thing about Pluto is that it gives us those boss battles in small doses since it moves so slow, so don't be afraid to take the time to be reflective. You have more than enough time to get this figured out. Aquarius in 2023 are likely to have a love and hate relationship. This is the year of responsibility more than anything else. It might have its bumps along the road, but I can assure you when you look back, you'll see how pivotal the events of this year were to get you on the right track. It's crucial to remember that not every hardship is terrible, and not every party is good. Stay blessed and good luck, Aquarius.